Greetings and welcome to another live transmission of Saskia Unreserved with my special guests. We're also streaming on 88.2 and from cybc.com.cy. And we heard there both symphonias in E-flat major, Opus 6, number 3, and the Symphonia Opus 9, number 2, a recording made in 1978 with the Bournemouth Sinfonietta, conducted by Kenneth Montgomery. Very warm welcome if you've just joined me. You're tuned into Saskia Unreserved, coming to you live from Rick Classic. We're also streaming on Facebook from Saskia Konstantinu from my site, so please join me there, and you'll be able to connect with my very special guest today, discussing a very interesting and I think imperative subject: social mediation in peace building. We have enough strife and animosity, hatred, and I think it's good to build on such a positive subject. So thank you both for coming into the studio. Dr. Nadia Kornioti, International Humanitarian Law in Cyprus, and Dr. Katerina Antoniou, lecturer in hospitality tourism management and with a PhD in international peace building. I've got that right, I think. And also I claim from the School of Law, so a dual work. Fascinating reading from peer-reviewed publications from both of you. So, as I said, an honor to have you in the studio. And I'd like to begin by answering the question, what exactly is social mediation? Maybe you'd like to give us both your perspectives.
Sure. Do you want to go ahead? You go first. Social mediation can be a peace-building tool in the sense that we are taking the tool of mediation, facilitated dialogue between disputants, and we're bringing it to different small-scale social conflicts that we can see every day around us, whether they are in the workplace, whether they are in a school environment, whether they are in our neighborhood, in our community, or even larger social groups.
Yes.
And we can each of us become a social mediator and have the skills to facilitate dialogue in order to resolve different types of everyday conflict.
Do you find that there is that interest in resolving conflict, or do people have their egos getting in the way and they just don't want to solve problems? I'm thinking more on a personal level and at a business level before we go on an international level.
Mm-hmm. Well, a conflict is not a positive experience by any means.
Yes.
It really depends, I would say, how and in what environment you try to resolve a conflict, which brings us again to mediation as an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. In legal language, a mechanism that is used out of the courtroom. So if we imagine a contract dispute between two companies, when they go to the court, the adversarial atmosphere within the courtroom is likely to reinforce the conflict. Whereas if you have a mediation as your option of dispute resolution mechanism, then the two parties might actually feel more comfortable in a friendlier environment with a third party that is actually participating in the dialogue and enables toning down the conflict side of things and reinforcing the aspects that the two parties agree on. So it's really a matter of how you resolve a conflict.
Do lawyers facilitate this kind of mediation? Because from my personal experience, whenever a lawyer is involved, they like to go to war. They don't really want to go down the mediation way. Is that a false perception?
I think as a perception it's not at the moment, but it depends on the person, like with any occupation.
Yes.
One of the best advice I had received as a trainee barrister here in Nicosia many years ago was that a good lawyer is the one that uses the court as a last resort.
Ah, bravo.
So
we need
are
more
encouraged.
like-minded people.
Yes.
But we should also mention that social mediation is about taking mediation out of the legal context, not even as an alternative to a legal dispute, but it's about applying it from non-lawyers and from people of different backgrounds that simply know how to effectively use the tool and become effective facilitators in resolving a conflict, essentially in empowering the people involved in the conflict to resolve it themselves.
What do you think is the best setting and structure for social mediation?
I would say that sometimes it depends on each case, but the setting should be a case that provides a safe zone, that it's not triggering, and also the ground rules that the facilitator or the social mediator will put in place need to ensure the equality of the participants, so we don't have power imbalances or asymmetries, and also the ability for each side to honestly share their opinions and knowing that they are safe when doing so. Of course, when it comes to any legal implications or any legal aspects coming into the conflict, then that's where social mediation stops, and then other legal measures could be taken. But it doesn't mean that social mediation wouldn't be effective both in a smaller scale conflict, but also in more severe conflicts as well.
When there's a lack of agreement on issues, both parties unwilling to negotiate or mediate, is there any hope? And how does a mediator find that first piece of common ground?
I would start with a lot of patience. You shouldn't give up the process. You should
from the mediator's perspective, or from all the parties?
Definitely from the mediator's perspective, because as a neutral party, it's less likely to be emotionally also involved in the dispute at hand. And I think it really depends, because in order for mediation to work, like any alternative dispute resolution, you need the consent of the parties. So it's maintaining this desire of the parties of actually solving a conflict, resolving the conflict. That is the responsibility of the mediator, and not to get irritable to the extent that everybody will be irritable and then we just draw a line.
Yes. How do you find the social mediator? How does one find the social mediator? Do you need special qualifications?
It has been a new framework under which the mediation tool is coming to be used by more people and in more ways. And in Cyprus, it's actually a novel initiative. So it's just starting with the opportunity of a number of trainings that we have done that act as introductory to being able to practice social mediation at large. So what we hope to come out of our project on social mediation is not only the resources that we already have available, including a social mediation handbook, and not just the initial 2-day trainings that we have been delivering to approximately 70 to 80 trained social mediators already. But what we want to do is have a more long-term reference point, which would be a network of social mediators that people can refer to, and that network in itself will also have levels of various levels of expertise, ideally where more experienced social mediators can get acknowledged for the work that has been done. And the network can altogether act as a reference point.
What kind of people and from which industries have you found there to be the greatest interest?
Well, it's a very varied group of people. I mean, some people are social mediators by nature. It's a kind of person that doesn't like a dispute and might come in. So what we do is actually guide the people and offer them also some theoretical background and some exercises to be able to better manage that skill if they already have it.
We have had interest from educators, from police officers, from academics,
activists,
from a lot of members of non-governmental organizations and civil society in general.
Is it something that's done on a voluntary basis?
Absolutely, yes.
In South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation process was chaired by Desmond Tutu and divided into 3 committees: human rights violations, amnesty, and reparations and rehabilitation. In Cyprus, we're not able to move forward. Do you think that this is a time and a place for a sort of TRC process here?
I would say that social mediation has quite a different application from the example of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, because that's more about acquiring justice from an external party in order to bring in closure, whereas in this case we want to empower people themselves to engage in initiatives that will help alleviate or minimize conflicts within their own community, or even to connect it with the Cyprus problem. But the way we can do that is complementary to the political mediation route that is taking place. So
that's why I asked about that, because obviously on a political level it's not working.
So the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, it was a political step.
Yes.
When it comes to social mediation, it can definitely be used as a complementary tool in the way that it can open up the process, the peace process of negotiating a settlement, involve members of both communities directly in voicing their concerns or being part of the process of reaching a compromised solution, providing feedback to the political mediation process. So there's different ways that we could apply social mediation as a tool that can engage the public and can make the public more directly involved in a process that we are now considering to be dying, essentially.
Yes. Have you had any experience or been part of any social mediation between the 2 communities?
We haven't formally applied it between the 2 communities, but what we have been applying in our trainings is how social mediation can be linked to different social identities. The reason we are saying this is because our trainings have been intercommunal. They have involved both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, but a lot of times we see that Greek and Turkish Cypriots are connected by a different social identity, potentially gender or their profession or something else, and they're not so much divided by their ethnic identity. So social mediation can take place to reach compromises between gaps that come from different social identities and still inform the Cyprus peace process and not necessarily come from a division between the 2 ethnic communities.
It is something we touch extensively on in the workshops, the whole idea of identity. What does it mean because we ask participants to tell us what they identify as their top 5 identities. It could be, I'm not going to get into the theory behind it.
No, it's fine.
But for example, some people might put an emphasis on their gender. Other people might say, oh yeah, I do happen to be a man, but I never think about it as something that defines me. I'm more defined as a football fan, for example.
Yes.
So identities vary. And with regard to Cyprus specifically, and as a result of the intercommunal nature of the workshops we have been providing, it's how we get to know each other better, actually. For me personally, this is the most valuable aspect of it, because if we are discussing a scenario on bullying at school or sexual harassment at work, which are scenarios we are using in the workshops, it's an opportunity also to see of how different people experience this in a connected yet divided social context. So far, social mediation has helped a lot in that respect.
Yes.
In terms of applying it to a true social conflict, this has not come around yet.
Right. Desecuritization in peace building is another of your research interests. Is this not more of a theoretical situation rather than an actual application of the concept?
The concept of desecuritization or social mediation?
Of desecuritization in peace building.
I have looked into this topic personally by looking at how it can practically apply, how it has practically applied. Desecuritization essentially refers to deconstructing an identity and understanding why we perceive that it's under threat. So that also links back to social mediation, because a lot of times social mediation is most useful when it comes to underlying threatened identities that make us become opponents and rivals to other people around us, without realizing that the reason we have this dispute with the coworker is because we are perceiving that we're not being equally treated based on our gender or based on our age or based on our appearance or anything like that. So when it comes to looking at desecuritization in peace building, we are specifically looking at how peace builders, although they are trying to apply this tool of bringing people together, they don't often apply to themselves internally. So there could be disputes between different peace builders. There could be power imbalances that prevent the peace builders from doing their work as effectively as they could.
Have you taken into consideration the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or is Cyprus a completely unique situation?
I would say they're both very, very different, because when we're looking at identities and how they are threatened in different ways, then theoretically the two conflicts look similar, but then there are different ways that these threats can be deconstructed, and people can imagine a world where there's reconciliation in place.
Yes.
If I may, I am a bit on the opposite side for Katerina on this, because I think it has been a trap that we have fallen into in Cyprus, arguing that we are a unique case, and then this leads to a competition among conflicts, who has suffered the most, who has been the biggest victim of a situation.
Yes.
Whereas we can learn a lot from comparing our conflict here by other so-called frozen conflicts around the globe, because some of the elements are actually very, very similar. Even if by deconstructing it you might come down to different components. For example, in Cyprus, many people assume maybe that frequently that people that are not familiar that it's a religious conflict, because we are Christians and Muslims. But this is definitely, I mean, in university I had to clarify this many times, that it's a political conflict. It was on basis of nationalism that it started. It was not religion.
No.
And then you have Ireland, when people will not realize that maybe the religion played such a huge impact, because at the end of the day the Irish are all Christians, but it is a sectarian conflict at the end of the day between Protestant and Catholic. So, however, I don't agree that it would be right to say that we are unique. We have lost a lot by having this narrative in the last decades that it is a unique conflict, Because it's not. I mean, there are different comparable factors with other conflicts to a lesser or a greater extent. That's a matter of debate.
I think the perspective from which I differentiate them is not so much the nature of the conflict, but the approach that we take in resolving them. What I'm looking at is the peace-building perspective, where if we take intractable ethnic-based conflicts to be similar and apply similar mechanisms to resolve them, that's often where they get stuck. The mechanisms get stuck because it's important to customize each peace-building approach based on the local dynamics. When it comes to peace-building, a lot of the scholarly argument around the effectiveness of peace-building is that you should always take into consideration local perspectives, because that will formulate the dynamic and how it's more appropriate for that specific culture and that specific time frame to work with specific mechanisms and a unique combination of the mechanisms that you want to apply.
There's a lot of funding being given out for these peace-building initiatives and activities, and I sometimes look at them and just see that it's a way of receiving funds for someone to do their projects. Am I totally disillusioned with the whole process, or is there something real and tangible that can be measured from these so-called bi-communal projects that keep happening?
If I can respond briefly on this, what we can see, one of the main components of the peace-building projects that were implemented in the past 15 years or so is the ability to apply intercommunal contact in a way that allows the people engaging in it to have positive interactions with people of the other community that they wouldn't otherwise have. So this is very important, because in order to have positive contact with a group that is considered rival or politically opposing, you need to have certain conditions in place that unfortunately are not there in everyday society. So these projects help to put the optimal conditions in place and bring some people together. And for the people that are engaged, this can be life-changing. So even though we don't see this large-scale change from one day to the next as a political change would be, this is more sustainable change because it happens on the individual level. And even if the same project or the same activity is repeated every year and it's the same thing, it would still, if it involves different people, it can still make very, very significant steps of progress, because it's actually changing mindsets in the way that these people, after having physical contact with the people that are supposed to be their rivals and decide that these people are actually more similar to me than what I thought, then these are the people that will look at the reconciliation process from a different perspective. And the change that's happening is not politically evident, but it's definitely socially evident.
How fast has it been, and do we need to make things go a little faster, or am I just impatient?
I think at this very moment in time, we are all disillusioned a bit, because different projects have been taking place since 2003, and we are aware of things happening beyond the island, beyond 2003, when the checkpoints opened, the first
17 years ago.
Yes.
Of course, there were peace-building projects since the 80s in Cyprus.
Yes, that's true.
On a less frequent basis, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So at the moment, I think we have reached a political stalemate, for sure. But also, what we have been doing for 70 years, although very, very useful and very beneficial, I completely agree with Katerina, I think we have reached a point where we need to be a bit more risky, maybe try some new things, or, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is, the other potential difficulty is the fact that the political situation is not moving. So we have been trying for the last 17 years, we have been going through a process of politics going one way and the social aspect going the other way. But maybe that it's time for the two to start.
How are you going to do
closer.
that?
Well, I would say that one way to do that is through applying the tool of social mediation, and I can explain how.
Yes.
When we say that we want to resolve the Cyprus problem, what we're looking for a peace settlement, but we're also looking for the people of the island to be ready for the peace settlement. So these are two different components, the political one and the social one. Obviously, the political one needs to move forward in order to have an agreed settlement. But at the same time, you need to have a population that's ready to facilitate this change. And the way to do that is by actually engaging the population as much as possible into the mediation process. A lot of people today that are the only thing that they see about the Cyprus problem is that it has been unresolved and there's no prospect of resolving it. But they don't really know the mechanisms of mediation and why mediation can be a good approach to a peace settlement. And at the same time, why does it take so long? The key to that is because it has to be owned by the parties. So we as Cypriots can decide our solution in a way that can be sustainable in the future, but in order to reach an agreed solution, we need to have consent towards a solution. We need to be ready for a compromise, and we need to acknowledge, we need to empathize with the other party and at the same time feel empowered. So this is a very complex combination of elements that if we engage not only the politicians to the political mediation process, but also the people to a similar process that is the mediation tool applied on a social level, then the people will understand and will engage with the complexity of the process in a way that they will also be empowered to brainstorm on what a potential solution would look like.
Ontological security was developed by Anthony Giddens, and he defines it as signifying a sense of continuity and order in events and the ability to answer existential questions. So I want to ask about memory. How do we deal with that? To follow up on what you've said, how does one put what's happened to oneself onto one side and say, you know what, this is enough. Let's move forward. It's happened. We have to deal with it. We have to accept it. Maybe this is a question more for a psychologist. I don't know, but it's something that you surely have to deal with from a social mediation aspect.
Well, memory studies, as a study, is by default an interdisciplinary area. But it's true that there is a lot of input from anthropologists and social psychologists. And, well, I have studied it a bit as part of my own research, but without being an expert or being able to evaluate different components as the way a psychologist would be able to, or an anthropologist. I think it's an upcoming question that we are all having around the globe in conflict situations at the moment. If we think about Colombia or South Africa or our own situation, when you have a conflict, that has been around for decades, people tend to forget that they need to adapt to the circumstances of the past. I mean, we have the tendency, and lawyers as well do that, to interpret a situation by the eyes we have today. Whereas we need a bit of a historical input here in order to examine what was the situation at the time when the conflict occurred, and how is our perception today twisted, if you want, by these decades that have passed by, and the fact that I have never experienced what was happening here so many years ago. I only heard about it. And that touches...
Because you're now the next generation.
Exactly. And that touches on one of my favorite areas, I must say.
Yes.
Which is all this psychological research that has been done on how our memory, our brain perceives the memories of those who have actually been through events. There is a lot of research, without wanting to become too concrete because I cannot talk with accuracy on the matter. But there has been a lot of research on how children growing up with the stories of the grandparents or the parents of a traumatic experience like a conflict, how that has an effect on their very own existence. As
and
if
becomes
they
their
are,
own memory.
And becomes their own memory.
Bravo, yes. It becomes so, I can just say, altered. In so many ways. It's like what you call them, these sort of broken records, and by the time you've heard it down the line, it's not actually the reality of what happened. It's been added to and amended and quite a few other adjectives, along the way.
And because it's some part of your heritage, that particular traumatic memory, it's much harder for younger generations to abolish that or to critically reevaluate it, because it has been transmitted to them. So it's not their own to deconstruct. And it's harder because memory is part of someone's multiphasic social identity. So to understand my identity from a memory that has been passed on to me, then that becomes very complex to address, and it becomes much more complex for the trauma to be healed.
And there are simple...
But it isn't actually the trauma of the next generation.
It's the trauma that has been passed on as part of a dissonant heritage. So it's possible for the younger generation to feel traumatized or to feel this lack of closure to a conflict, this lack of justice that has been passed on from previous generations.
How do you deal with that?
It's again part of deconstructing an identity and perceptions to understand where the threat is coming from, and to see how you can address that threat in order for those people to move forward.
Is there any sort of social mediation between the generations? So for critical thinkers of the new generation, because there must be some around, to say, well, you know what? How did this happen? And I've heard other views. Or does that in itself create further conflict between the two generations?
Social mediation in general, I would say, has endless ways to be applicable, because it's essentially facilitated communication. So whatever you want to communicate when it comes to overcoming trauma or moving forward or envisioning a solution, a political solution, all that can be applied through facilitated discussions between parties with opposing views. So when it comes to addressing a past memory, it doesn't necessarily have to be from the approach of reaching back to the truth, but there could be closure if there is enough attention to moving forward and understanding how that can be done. So social mediation is not about being the psychologist in the room and trying to unfold what happened in the past, if it's true, if it's 100% accurate, if there are other perspectives. That can also be discussed in the process of identifying why you feel threatened, but at the same time envisioning a future where that identity is no longer threat, and agreeing to a new scenario where that identity can exist with a different identity, then that would be sufficient for someone to move forward.
But in order not to leave a huge gap here, when we talk about memory, it's apart from the social mediation and whatever mechanisms, structured mechanisms can come around, there are two very important components. The one is memorials, the effect that memorials in our daily life have on us. And Germany is considered one of the prime examples of how they have used spaces and statues or just symbols around Berlin, if you go, and so on. And the other thing is the importance of history in terms of making organizing workshops where historical facts are being discussed, digging out archives from the past, allowing people free access to information, whether on a personal level or what happened in village so-and-so so many years ago, and so on. These are things that there have been some great efforts in Cyprus, but they have not yet developed to the full extent they could have been. And part of it is because there is this resistance to question the past. And I think this is something that with certainty we can say happens on both sides of the divide.
The leaders and the dialogue that they have between themselves and out to the public and to each community, how much influence do they exert on people's mindset?
I would answer this from the securitization theory.
Yes.
What leaders or authority figures say can be acknowledged as credible or not taken into consideration based on whether that agrees with the values and beliefs of the person that's receiving the message. So someone who is feeling that the Cyprus conflict is not going well and that there's a threat from the opposing community, to hear that from a leader reaffirms their position. So that person will agree with the leader's speech act. But if the person has lived experiences that discredit what the leader is saying, then so if someone is engaged in peace-building activities and then hears a politician say that the other community is threatening, they won't believe it in the same way. That's why when it comes to the process of constructing a threat or reaffirming the threat from an authority position, it's important for people to be engaged in society in ways that allows them to have their own critical perspective, because then they would be less influenced by the decision of a politician or a political figure to introduce a threat to them.
What about the role of the media in reporting what is actually happening and how inflammatory it can or is?
It depends on the credibility, I would say, of the media to each individual. So if someone is less critical, doesn't have information on a specific topic, and the only information they have is what they hear political figures saying and what they hear the media reiterating, then they're more prone to believing that. But if we have access to different sources of information and particularly lived experiences, then it's we are much more able to be critical and filter the information we receive through the media.
And also, my legal self kicks in now. As a lawyer, I think journalists have a great responsibility in the words they use, especially if those words are legally defined words that carry some kind of normative strength that lead to results. It's very important to choose and speak of the correct terminology. I'm not expecting everybody to be at the level that an academic journal in law will analyze things. But it matters, the terminology we use.
Of course, words matter.
Exactly. And
do you think that there's not sufficient care taken in the words that are used?
I think yes. And sometimes this ambiguity is also desirable.
But also a lot of the approaches used are the conventional approaches, and we forget that conventional approaches of the words we choose sometimes can be sexist, discriminatory, because they used to be in the past, or they can be discriminatory towards other political figures, and to be more neutral in the words you're using, and not to be expressing your own opinion, but simply to be delivering the news. Yes, that takes a lot of attention in order to choose your words carefully. So journalists do have the responsibility of their words.
After a lot of years, I think, of reporting the same issue over and over, I think it's also very difficult to remain impartial. Everybody eventually does have some kind of opinion, and possibly this permeates through in the reporting that's done. What are your observations on that?
I think it is possible for journalists to be more neutral by being multi-partial. So if being impartial is difficult,
okay.
Yes, being multi-partial means that you are not only providing your own perspective, but you're able to voice the different perspectives on this issue when you're delivering the news. So this is definitely...
Is it multi-partial, I would term as objective?
It's definitely...
Is it different?
Sorry?
Is it different?
Than objective?
Yes.
Yes.
Multi-partial.
Multi-partial is essentially your ability to voice not only not a neutral voice, but to provide space for all the heated voices that are there on the matter. So you can still provide the full picture by providing the information from the different angles that it's out there, as if you are reading multiple news sources, but you can incorporate that in one. The multi-perspectivity.
Having said that, an opinion is not wrong as such. Holding an opinion as a journalist, I mean, we have from around the world a few examples that they do hold an opinion. The thing is, how do you present those facts? And by using the power that the media gives you, and to reach out to so many people, to make sure you acknowledge that other opinions exist as well. It's not necessarily bad to hold an opinion. That's perfectly normal, and even I'm sure even the most neutral, poker-faced person can have an opinion at the back.
Right.
It's just to allow the discussion to happen. And I have found Cypriot media from my childhood, if I can have any opinion from my childhood, it's there has been progress in what we discuss in public, because for many years it was suppressed. Many aspects of the Cyprus conflict were suppressed for many years.
Maybe social media has had something to do with that. It's come to the fore. It's easier to access and to have conversations and dialogue, and so it sort of brings me to having your social identity. And how important is this in a global world?
To have a social identity?
Yes.
I think everyone has multiple social identities that coexist at the same time. Even the ethnic identity is one of our social identities. So I think the biggest, I would say, scam is that we are part of one community and we're trying to define and protect that one community, when at the same time we are members of so many different social communities at the same time. For example, I can be a Greek speaker and belong to a Greek-speaking community. At the same time, I can be non-religious or have a specific religion and belong to a different social community. I can be a mother, I can be a peace builder, I can be an activist and belong in different communities. And what I prioritize depends on the conditions, the conditions of that specific setting and that specific time frame. And I can come closer to certain people because of one identity, whereas another identity of ours might have us be opposing based on our political ideologies or based on our backgrounds or anything else. So I think the first step in acknowledging who we are and understanding how some of our identities can be threatened is to acknowledge that we are not just members of one specific group, but we have so many different social identities at so many different levels.
In your article for the conversation, Katerina, your heading is "Time to take the Cyprus question to the people." And it made me question the whole concept of referenda. Do you believe that this is a solution, especially in light of what we've just seen with regards to Brexit?
Well, I think a referendum is the last step of a process, a long process. And the question here regarding the Cyprus problem is how do we involve people in all the previous steps before reaching to a referendum? To not have people being directly engaged in the process and asking them to voice a yes or no at the end of it is unfair to the political understanding, the critical thinking, and the civic duty that all individuals hold. So it's too late to just provide the referendum at the end. You have to engage the people earlier than that. And that's why we need to figure out whether social mediation or other tools can make that possible so that the Cyprus peace process can be an open process and a democratic process that allows citizens to be part of it.
Do you think that referenda per se actually work?
I think that's...
I mean, can one actually say yes or no? I mean, I can imagine a question, do you want a united Cyprus? Yes or no? Well, sorry. I don't...
United Cyprus.
I mean, who is qualified to understand the parameters of what it'll mean?
So I think the answer to that is my previous position, to not expect people to simply answer a question at the end if they haven't been involved in the process beforehand.
Even if someone is involved in the process, how many processes and how much information and what education level? Because when it comes to a referenda, everybody can vote. So maybe, you know, the granny sitting in front of the fireplace, with all respect, because she's probably doing a fabulous job of feeding the grandchildren, isn't familiar enough with the situation and the parameters and everything else to actually give a vote.
But I think there's a lot of ways and tools and opportunities that people who are educated and specialized in the process to make this information simple and approachable. For example, now we have the democratic debates for the nomination in the United States for the presidential elections. How do people get information? There's different questionnaires that say, what are your positions? These are the candidates that you can align with based on your positions. Or what are the 10 most important issues? This is what candidates have said regarding these issues. So you can simplify information for people. Not everyone has to be an expert, but everyone can be involved in political processes as long as the society and the experts and the civil society and at the political front, we are able to utilize the experts on the matter in a way that they can act themselves as mediators and facilitate the communication between the political level and the social level.
I think it's also important to shift the answer away from the people, though, also. because there has been a lot of research as well on how are referendum questions posed to people and what is the answer. And there is even statistic of people are more likely to vote yes or more likely to vote no, so how I'm going to put down the syntax of that question, and how is the media going. I mean, for example, the referendum on the independence of Scotland, there was tremendous criticism on how the BBC handled that, because arguably for many it was not even impartial in the period before. That brings in everything we have discussed until now: the critical thinking, the information, the responsibility of the media, literacy, of course.
I see it also as a sort of platform to legitimize hate speech, and we've seen this.
You mean referendum?
Yes, having it in the States. We saw it with Brexit as well. Even families. We've heard of families parting ways because of the angst, the anxiety, the anger, the completely opposing ideas.
But this is not necessarily a sign of referenda.
No, but it opens it. Yes, but it opens it all up. But what are you going to vote?
It's a tangible way of opening it up, for sure. But I think under any circumstances, a very tense political situation can have that effect of growing incidence of hate speech. When a legal framework to protect people from hate speech is lacking or it's ineffective, or families disagreeing over politics. I mean, anyway, it's just something new for us.
So frameworks for protecting from hate speech is something separate that should be in place. But I think what the example of hate speech coming up at referenda shows that people were not ready to come to that last step as their first instance of civic engagement. So I will go back to saying open up the dialogue beforehand, before it's about a yes or no that will undoubtedly divide people into two groups, however large they are. It will divide them. So before doing that, try to bring them together to voice their concerns in respectful and controlled environments.
If we go back and we look at ours here that we had in Cyprus, in hindsight, if there had been a solution, there would have been a lot more steps having gone forward, wouldn't there?
Well, that's the argument that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So if nothing is agreed, that means that there's no moving forward. That has also been questioned for Cyprus, because if we are expecting for a comprehensive peace settlement as the beginning of transitioning our society towards collaboration and safety and stability, then we are simply just waiting endlessly. It's important to take the steps before then. So it's important to take steps that lead up to a sustainable settlement, steps that engage the public way before a referendum, and ways that essentially allow the process to be more open, more transparent, and more reciprocal.
Yes.
So it's not just about political leaders voicing outcomes to us, it's about us also providing our feedback to the political leaders.
In closing, I just want to draw attention to the handbook for public servants, for NGO staff and members, community workers, youth workers, teachers, non-formal trainers and educators. Is this handbook available to everybody? And
Yes.
where can they find it? It's something that you've worked on together.
Yes, it's a project we had implemented with Interdisciplinary Center for Law, Alternative and Innovative Methods at the university. The
Of UCLan
handbook
Cyprus?
Of UCLan Cyprus, yes. And the handbook is available for free at www.social-mediation.org. And it's exactly the same as the printed version we used to have. And it's on this handbook specifically that the workshops, the series of workshops we are doing this winter are based on. Shall I mention the
Please.
last one? Okay,
Please.
so last opportunity in this series of workshops is the fourth workshop taking place on 22nd and 23rd of February at the premises of UCLan Cyprus in Pila. People can either go on the university's website or find the Facebook page Social Mediation in Practice 2019-2020 and sign up. Please register if you're interested. Don't just show up.
Yes.
It helps with preparation.
Yes.
It's a free
It's for
training.
Free training.
2 days from 9 in the morning to approximately 4 in the afternoon, depending on how long our discussions will take place. And I think we can now also announce at the end of March or early April, we will have the conference only for the participants of the workshops.
Okay.
So all the trained social mediators will be invited to a conference where we will be launching our network of social mediators.
Yes.
And looking at the next steps of how we can apply social mediation in Cyprus in different contexts, including the Cyprus one.
Excellent. Is this done in English or in Greek?
It's in English.
With
but
the opportunity for translation in Greek and Turkish.
All right, so that's perfect. We've got everybody covered then.
And we have tried it, so it works.
Yes.
We had some really nice discussions over the previous workshops, which, by the way, with the support, because it's valuable support,
Yes.
of the United Kingdom High Commission in Cyprus.
Excellent. Thank you so much both for being here. It's been very interesting
you
to
for
speak
having
to
me.
you
Very
both, Dr. Nadia Kornioti.
I'm not a
and
doctor.
I
It's
had
just
it.
unfair for everybody who are actually doctors to give,
They have to correct the website where I corrected.
Expecting her PhD very soon.
Okay, so candidates, okay. And Dr. Katerina, Antoniou, thank you so much,
Thank you very much.
both
Thank
for
you very
being here.
much.
Thank you. And a reminder, you're tuned into Rec Classic, 23 minutes past 1, and we're going to continue Saskia Unreserved with the overture to Euryanthe by Weber.